class
so I
for
knew
5
a
years.
lot
She's
of some of the
fucking
stuff the
hilarious.
first day.
Yeah.
So
You're
I
pretty
started
good at
tutoring
technology
one of her
anyway.
kids,
And I gotta,
and so
like, I
we're
feel
just
bad at
exchanging like my tutoring hours for daycare hours.
You're just like,
So she
I
just
gotta get laser.
texted me. She goes, "Do you have a cash app?" And I
have
said,
that.
"No, why?" It's like, "You don't owe me money." She's like, "No, I want to buy you
The
a
zones,
outfit."
the training for the zones.
She wanted me, but she wanted to buy an outfit for today because she was like, she called me the convention thing. And so I was like,
Are we ready? Okay.
and I wanted to
Great.
be sitting here.
Thank you, and we appreciate it. We had a lot of great conversation at lunch, so we thank everybody for sharing at lunch about, we weren't talking about textbooks, we were just talking about education in general and the layout of the land today. So with that, I think we're going to turn it over to you. Eric is our legal counsel, and he's going to walk us through our ethics training. So this is, I think, a real important part. So write your questions. Can they interrupt as they have questions, or would you like for us to wait until the end?
Sure. Let's make this lively, right?
Okay.
I mean, it's 1 o'clock. It's after lunch. Many of you stayed up late last night and watched the Carolina Duke game. We'll make this as lively as this ethics conversation can be. Hopefully, no one will blow out any sneakers like Zion Williamson did last night. But my goal is for this to be painless and put no one on the injured reserve list after talking about a couple issues today. We're going to start off talking about public records and open meetings. And, you know, I don't think there's going to be any groundbreaking revelations for you in this presentation about public records and open meetings, but I do think it's important for you to recognize that these high standards and transparency that's been brought to bear on the Textbook Commission really underlines the importance of the work that you're doing for North Carolina school kids and school districts and parents. So I commend you for taking on this task. I know it's a time-intensive task, but it's also an important one. And part of that gravity is underlined by the fact that we have these laws that apply to the work that you do. And sort of this openness of this process as best we can. So let's start with public records. Okay, so when we say public records, we think that public records means all of these different kinds of things that I have on the screen here, regardless of the medium. If it's a public document, it can be, you know, a piece of paper. It could be a sound recording, like what's recording right now as we stream internationally. Well, I suppose anyone who wanted to listen internationally could. Whether it's books, photos, maps, whatever the medium, if it's a public record, it doesn't matter what form it comes in. Any documentary material. So not only does it apply to the form, but also the content. So as you do the official work of this commission, whether it's this agenda that you have at your desk, whether it's notes that you make, whether it's emails that you share with fellow commission members, if it's within the work that you're doing for this commission, it's going to be a public record. So you can see some examples here on the screen. I'm sure sitting here today, you could probably come up with some other creative things that might fall into this bucket content-wise. But in terms of drafts and reports, recommendations and the like, your correspondence, whatever form it's in, if it's on behalf of this commission's work or within that realm, it's going to be a public record. Okay, so there are a couple things that aren't public. If you and I need to correspond about a legal matter, and I didn't introduce myself, so I serve as counsel for our State Board of Education for the Department of Public Instruction. So we'll, myself and my colleague Melissa Strong here in the gallery, will provide legal advice to this commission to the extent you have legal questions that come up. If those are questions of a legal nature and we have to opine on how the statutes work or how a policy might apply to a decision you're making or an action you're taking, that's a kind of communication that would fall outside of public records. You can see some other information that may become relevant to this inquiry for you, but you should know that there are other exceptions that are outlined in statute. Trade secret information. Y'all are not going to come across medical records or criminal investigation records, but those are these other kinds of items that are a bit farther afield, also sort of fall in that bucket of exceptions to public records. So that's just available for you to sort of round out your understanding. Within the context of schools, Student files, of course, are protected by FERPA, not public records. That includes former student records, special ed records, criminal history records, or excuse me, criminal history checks, employee personnel files. Now, I can't imagine any of these things coming into bear with respect to your textbook evaluations, but important for you to know just in terms of background. And, you know, depending on how, depending on your experience bringing information and ideas and a framework into evaluating textbooks, you may have some creative commission members who might want to bring in some things. I would advise against that. These items ought not figure into your deliberations, but if someone brought them in, we would say they were not public records. We're talking about transparency sort of at the top. You know, the idea would be any of this work that you do within this commission where you create a public record is ultimately something that the public can ask for and review. Now, if you have, if we receive a request here at the agency, or if someone asks for your documents, refer it into legal and we'll connect you with our communications department that responds to these requests. And we'll gather and review those materials. You don't have to worry about that process if someone comes and says, hey, hand me your agenda and your notes from your textbook commission meeting. Just don't worry about that. Pass that inquiry along to legal and we'll work with our communications office. You'll have enough on your plate without responding to these things. Not your job to worry about responding to the extent you ever get a request. And I have not seen one come in my year here, but who knows, right? Someone may get very excited about the work you're doing and want to inspect it. It's a big state and there's lots of interested people. Yes.
Sir,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Cheshire, my question to you would be, any request for information that comes to a commissioner on this board should direct all communication through the legal channels? Is that, I mean, within reason?
I would say within reason, right? You don't need to necessarily loop in legal or communications, but if someone is asking you for documents or asking you to interpret a statute, just pass that along. That's not something that you need to worry about. Say, I'm CCing our counsel here. You could just direct it to Carmela, and she can route that to us. So I think if you get those kinds of inquiries where you're like, this is a little bit out of the ordinary, or I didn't expect this, whether it's about the process from someone interested in the public, whether it's someone asking for documents, if you just loop in Dr. Fair, we can help you respond to that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Commissioner Moody, one of the things that I had a question about last year, this is just an example, and they were very helpful, is we have a partnership with Apple, and not knowing whether they would be submitting something last year during that period of time, I was attending a conference with them during that period. You know, and I just wanted to clarify in my own mind. I didn't want to do anything that kind of jeopardized. We sent it to legal for a response. So anything with vendors specifically, that it just, if it's a question that comes up, or you know, sometimes teachers and principals and even committee members, you may be at a conference where there's a vendor fair, and just ask counsel about what you can and cannot do.
Right, and we're happy to answer those questions for you. And I think we're reasonably good about getting a good turnaround time for you.
Right.
And if something's urgent, you need to know right away. If you phone Carmela, she'll track us down
Often
and
she
help you answer
knows
that
before
question.
we even send it. Yeah, she can.
And I suppose sort of underlining that question is the idea that, you know, anyone can ask for these records. Now, when we have a specific process here at the agency. If someone is interested in collecting this information, we route them through our communications office. So even when requests come in to the legal department, this isn't a gotcha or sort of a bureaucratic pass the buck. It's rather we have a channel set up for this so that we can track and have accountability with respect to requests that come in. So we want to, you know, across the agency, whether it's this commission, whether it's our charter school advisory board or other advisory councils or state board members, as they get those kinds of requests, we just funnel them through communications so that we have a record, and the folks who do respond to these can respond in a uniform way. All right, so speaking of that response time, what the law really requires is a reasonable time, turnaround time, and response in a reasonable manner. Well, reasonable depends on where you sit, but it really depends on sort of the resources that the agency has, the scope of the request. A lot of times we'll get a request that comes in for materials, and we'll ask some clarifying questions so that we're providing what that person really wants. Sometimes we ask questions to sort of narrow the scope so we're responsive and not spinning our wheels gathering a whole bunch of information for someone when they have just a narrow request. Sometimes we ask folks precisely what they're looking for to narrow their question and, you know, save them time on their when they come to review materials. But, you know, not going to lie, that's helpful for the agency as well within our limited resources to respond more quickly if we're providing people precisely what they want. So sometimes we'll engage in a dialogue to make sure we understand what people are looking for. But that reasonableness is determined by the scope of the request, its specificity, and then the availability of agency resources to respond. Now, for folks in the public who make a records request, who have concerns about the speed with which the agency responds or the amount of materials provided, the courts have outlined a couple remedies for them. So they can, you know, if you're a member of the public, whether you're seeking information from DPI or any other public agency here in the state, if you think the agency is dragging its heels, a lot of times people will go to court and seek an order to compel the production of those materials. And if there is lawsuits, what that means is, you know, for the requester, he or she can recover attorney's fees. So we have every incentive to be responsive, and we try to be responsive, and we're certainly committed to transparency here within DPI. So we're always doing our best. Sometimes the best isn't good enough for some. Before we move on to open meetings, does anyone have any questions about public records? I think you're all probably well familiar with this from your own experience working with governments and knowing what's, you know, just reading the paper and perhaps sitting with your own school boards. Any questions or concerns? Okay. All right, so open meetings, what are your legal responsibilities? Well, thankfully, I'll tell you that a lot of the background work to set up the public meetings is taken care of here by the department. These aren't things that you'll necessarily have to worry about. But all those open meeting rules apply here to the Textbook Commission. So that's why we're streaming today. That's why there's public notice of this meeting and of your future meetings. So you all are a public body. You are a commission, as the slide indicates. And that means, like our state board and other sort of sister boards and commissions here at the agency, you're going to be bound by those open meetings rules, right? So the public can be here today and sit in on this. And folks are available to, they can, you know, click on YouTube and listen to this discussion as well. So which meetings fall within sort of the rules of open public meetings? So that's going to be all of your official meetings where members are called to gather. And so long as you're doing one of these 5 functions that are on the screen, so you're not doing legislative work, I mean, arguably doing some sort of, I wouldn't put you in policy making, but you're implementing policies related to textbooks. I mean, you guys are sitting here in sort of advisory capacity and then ultimately making recommendations for the board for approval on these textbooks. Doesn't matter when you have the meeting or where or how, those really are inquiries that are, it doesn't matter as long as this group is meeting. You could meet here in Raleigh, you can meet in Charlotte, wherever you were to meet. If you were having an official meeting, it's got to be public. So what does this mean in terms of requirements? These are things that the agency will handle on your behalf. So we'll take care of the postings that discuss the purpose and time, date, and location of the meeting. You all may have special or emergency meetings. We don't anticipate that because we've got a pretty clear calendar of events for the Textbook Commission, but you know, sometimes you have to call a special meeting or emergency meeting in the event extenuating circumstances arise. Minutes will be kept and we'll have audio of this recorded. And those minutes have to reflect what happened, just like your local school board would, just like our state board, our charter school advisory board, our PEPC commission. There may be occasion where we would leave open public meeting and go into closed session. Again, and this is a circumstance where y'all may have a specific legal question that you need to ask, and we need to talk about that as a commission. And what we would do is turn off the mics. We would go next door into the board lounge and discuss those legal matters. And we would only discuss those legal matters, and there would be a motion to leave open session and go into closed to talk about attorney-client related matters. So there is, again, sort of a very narrow exception set out in statute for going into closed session. If in the event public meeting laws are not complied with, the remedies are public can seek an injunction to stop closed meetings, or they can also invalidate action taken by a public body that's not acting in the open space. So it can, if this group, for example, were to make decisions in the other room and sort of leave it at that and not make those decisions here in a public meeting, that can invalidate your decisions. Now, I'm not worried about that happening here because we're going to engage in best practices. But just we're trying to underline the idea that the official work of this commission, the decisions of this commission, are supposed to happen here in the open. And if they don't, they can be invalidated. Carmela will forward some resources to you, but you can follow these links that are going to be in a PowerPoint that she'll send if you're keenly interested in this for your next after lunch session. You know, maybe back at school or back in your office if you want to read more about open meetings or public records. So we've got some materials here. There's also some great materials from School of Government, Institute of Government. Those titles are here on the screen. Now, that's typically what we talk about in our ethics session. I know you all have let me get to the right title. In the 2019 operations manual, there are some policies that have been adopted here. That these are sort of towards the back of the packet. So the state board has created a standard of professional conduct that applies not only to board members, but also to DPI staff, as well as members of commissions and advisory councils. If you ever have it, I mean, you can read it for yourself. I'm not going to belabor it or read it here. I think the key is to avoid conflicts of interest, to disclose those. If you have questions, if you think something feels funny, in what if you're evaluating something that just doesn't feel right, or you think it might not look right to an outsider, we answer questions about real and perceived conflicts of interest all the time. We want you to feel comfortable with the work you're doing and want you to make sure that you feel above board. And we will provide you very candid assessments if there is an issue. And we will also provide assessments to give you peace of mind, right? I just want to make sure that I'm on the right here and that there is no issue. So the question Commissioner Moody raised about textbook fairs within your districts, or different encounters with folks who may present, who may submit textbooks as part of this process. If you reach out to Carmela or to the legal office, we will give you guidance on that so that you can feel like you're moving forward with confidence. I don't think there's anything particularly groundbreaking here in the policy other than, do right, look clean about how you do the work. But when it comes to those nitty-gritty questions, even if it's a straightforward one, we are more than happy to answer that call, and we'll do so, commit to do that to you, provide you a response very timely. Questions or concerns? I think all your sneakers are still intact.
Yeah.
I think this is probably pretty basic information for folks here. Y'all didn't get here without some background knowledge. So I don't know if I saw a ton of light bulbs today. This is really just to underline things you already know and just emphasize that this is important public work that you're doing, and it's going to be open to the public, and the expectation is that you will avoid conflicts of interest and recuse yourselves if some arise. And most importantly, so you see legal space in the event you do have questions that come up. That's really sort of, I think that's probably the most important takeaway, is you've got a resource that you can pick up the phone and call.
And I did put 3 resources that we wanted to share with you. I put those in the folder, the meeting folder for today. They're not numbered, but they're at the end of number 6. They all come down at the bottom. So those are things we would like you to look at as well.
Sure. I mean, y'all are going to do a lot of reading anyway with this big K-12 ELA project. The resources online are pretty basic, right? There's a write-up on public records and open meetings. And then, because you all are doing Robert's rules, sort of parliamentary approach to the commission, this is the other useful piece you're going to take away from this. In your folder, there's like a 5-page cheat sheet for Robert's rules, for motions and order of precedence on those things. If there's some wonky question that comes up with respect to the administration of the meeting, call legal and we'll help unwind that or provide guidance as needed. But that is just a very useful 5-pager that you might just keep in that folder, print and tuck away, because it's helpful in any public meeting context. And if there aren't any further questions,
Commissioner Linker, just one thing to point out. So 16, really had been 20. I have to go by my children's age to figure out how long I've been on. 16 years, I've never had anyone approach me. If Mickey Mouse Publisher knows that you're a commissioner, they know their ramifications, which is possible not being allowed to be on the list. They're not going to engage in any practice that would endanger their possibility. So it's really not a lot. But if you go, like, as teachers, sometimes we go to conferences and stuff, you can't really take the teddy bear from Mickey Mouse Publisher. But that's pretty much it. I mean, as long as you're doing the work of your school, right? As long as you're
I think that's
doing
right.
the work of your school, you're good. And if you identify yourself as a commissioner, then they know that, they're very aware of. It would more than likely be innocent on their part. And if you acknowledge that you are a commissioner, that's probably going to stop. They're probably going to stop their conversation just because they know the ramifications, which is stated in the operations manual, what could happen should they try to either purposefully or not purposefully influence the process.
You said it better in 48 seconds than I did in 5 minutes. Okay, maybe 10 minutes. A lot of this is very much eventualities. This is just sort of an important baseline, and it's not to put you all asleep after lunch, but just to put it on the table and say, we've checked this box, everyone's on the same page. And again, it's not a hefty risk, but you've got resources if you need to make a call. Well, friends, I look forward to hearing from you when you have thorny ethical questions that arise. Maybe not in the future. But thank you all for doing this work. It's important work, and I know it's a big commitment that you're taking on. So many thanks to you and your families for letting you do this work, and to your colleagues who are helping carry the load while you're away from your regular day-to-day. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
Mrs. Susan McKinney, she's our administrative assistant in digital teaching and learning, and she provides a lot of the support for the reimbursements and things like that. And she is going to come and pass out reimbursement information as well as substitute forms if there are any of you that need substitutes. So she'll be doing that. She's scheduled to come in at about 1:30. If it pleases you, Dr. Moody and Commissioner Linker, I can go ahead and start with the invitation, or if you all want to look at the documents that I just shared from Mr. Snyder, you can do that as well. But we'll be waiting for Susan to come. She should be coming shortly. Surprise!
I'll see you guys next time.
Okay. Okay, well, I just gave you an intro.
Okay, all right. Hi, everybody, glad to have you here. Okay, I do have substitute teacher forms, if anyone's interested in those. I only printed 5 because normally only one person will take them, but it looks like we're gonna need more. So, okay, so we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so I'll go print 2 more. I'll hand those out in just a second. I'm also gonna give you an envelope to mail your receipt, your parking receipt back to me, because most likely it's gonna be $14 to $16 when you, leave the parking lot. Make sure you write your name on here so I know who it's coming from, because sometimes I'll get one with no name, and it's really, really hard to figure out who it is.
And you do need to ask for a receipt if you're in the public parking. Do you just ask them when you pay, can I get a receipt? And they'll,
Yeah, and to be reimbursed, you must send me your original receipt. They will not take a copy in accounting. If we submit a copy, they'll just ignore it, just like you never even turned it in. So, okay, so then I'm gonna hand out the reimbursement sheet. At the top, it says Social Security, the last four digits. If you're not in our system, then I'll need your full Social Security number. And once you give that to me, then it's never used again. I white it out, and you're assigned a special number within accounts payable, so we don't have to use that. You need to fill in the highlighted sections, the payee's name, the title, your title within your LEA. Division section is just your county you're coming from, and your address, and make sure you sign it. And give me your cell phone number at the bottom as well, so if I have any questions, I can contact you. And if you're not comfortable writing your full social up here, just make sure you give me your cell so I can call you and you can give that to me over the phone. Do not email me a social, because our email will not accept it, nor do I want to, do that. It's just too risky. So, if you just want to give me the last four numbers, and I'll give you a call, we can do that. I'm going to do a MapQuest. Whatever address you put here, it should be your home address. Because if you drove from your home to Raleigh, back home again, that's what you'll get your mileage for. Whatever address you put in here is gonna be in our system forever. So if you move from, say you're in Cumberland County and you move to Vance County, that address is gonna stay, so you wanna use your home address. Because things change, and it's, to get things changed, we have to have a copy of W-9, and it's just annoying for you and for me, so, do we have enough of these for everyone? Okay, all right, so I will, let me take one of these, I'll go make copies, and, let me hand out what I have. Yes. Okay. Oh, I can do that if you want me to. There you go. Okay. Okay. You use Subborn?
No.
No, you do.
Cute.
Your-
I need some.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, when they put the amount in here, it's the full amount. Don't multiply it by the 65%. So if you pay your teacher, your sub, $105 per day, make sure it's in there, the $105. Don't multiply it by the 65. I have no idea why that's
So
there.
just mark through it?
No, just put in the full amount, and then your finance officer has to sign off on it. But the office will do that most likely.
textbook commissions, or we put in digital learning?
Sorry, yeah, I do need
But you
that,
need
yes.
that.
Harnett County.
Ma'am,
Okay, yes.
I send this in with my receipt, or are you taking these up?
I can take these from you if that's okay, and then just mail your receipt in to me.
I was gonna ask.
Oh, maybe
There's a
that's
little
what I'm
note down
not
here, mailing receipts, if you don't mind.
But it says the last four.
Yeah, but then she says,
Can you put her time
Oh, did we put, you wouldn't have to.
That's what commissioner's good.
Just coming around with envelopes.
Yes, yes, please.
Pamela?
Yes, whatever.
Thank you.
Did I give you an envelope?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Do you need a sub one?
elementary?
County.
It's all hands, but
Thank you.
sub one?
No, what are you talking about? When you say
Okay.
division
Okay,
section, what are you saying?
put your county you're coming from,
Okay,
and your title, just say textbook commissioner,
okay,
okay?
thank you.
The county you're coming from. I already read it.
it's the division,
And
and then textbook commissioners a section?
But now I'm confused.
then, yes.
It's the first time ever here, so
Like, I put the
are
North
you
Central
comfortable writing on
District.
there? 'Cause
Three.
I keep these locked up, okay, go ahead. Yeah, just write your social.
Yeah, just write the first set of them.
Yeah. Once I get a number signed, I just either black it out.
Squeezed it in for himself. Hopefully I'm in
You need a sub one?
Oh, I don't.
You said put your name on this one, right here.
Do it right here,
Where did you
just,
put the mileage?
I will do the mileage from this address to Raleigh,
Gotcha.
back again.
Perfect.
Okay?
Thank you.
So you don't have to do that.
Okay, thank you. Can you take these now?
I will, I'll collect in just a minute.
Yeah, I'm gonna blow your mind when you get over here.
I'll collect the forms after I come back with my copy of the sub-form.
Let me ask you this when you get
Okay.
back. I need to, because I got Dr. Moody's.
Okay.
Got the mail this?
We do need our full last four, if we've been on
You
it.
Robert, no, you don't. You
That's what
don't
I
need to
thought.
do it neither.
Title,
no.
is our title in our district, or like our title of
Just-
the board?
Finance board. And then, yeah.
Did,
that's
okay.
good.
And it's probably too late, but that's for my favor.
Thank you. Perfect, thank you.
Because I forgot to mail it to you, and I've had it in my wallet ever since.
Did I already do your
No,
mileage?
yes. I know,
That your
that's
name?
when I came to board, to
For
present
that
the Board of
money?
Education.
Or no?
It's okay, I
I'll
just have
check
it in
and
my
see.
wallet. Okay.
Write your name on there
I
and I'll
will.
check and see.
And then I'm gonna make you a note on here, but my mail, because this will always get messed up. My mailing address is the
Yes.
post office box, but I will write down here my street address for your mileage, because
Right.
if I put it up here, then you'll mail a check to the street address.
Usually
and-
what I do is I request your check and mail it myself.
Okay, all right, so do you want me to just put, so I bet 1403 slash and then put 212 Bell Street up here?
Yeah, but you'll note down here mail check too.
Okay.
Because there's so much going
I
on.
had to squeeze in that, is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So this is yours. Okay. And you need a sub form?
Yeah.
Okay. You need a sub form?
This form,
Yes, I thought
you
so.
don't need it because it's just your last four on it. You got my full social
Yep,
life.
that's great. Yep, that's fine. That's fine. Good.
As you can tell, we filled out many.
Where'd you drive from?
So we're like, wait, what do we do?
Okay, do you need a sub form?
I do. And then, so this is, I put that. I live about 25 minutes from Boone. But I also.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you better.
But the drive,
I work here.
Okay, I'll come back.
Do I get a receipt? Or is this not it?
every little thing.
Susan, you know if we came in last night, like you know that already?
I'm sorry, what?
You already know that we came in, we
Like
came in
this.
last
Am I
night?
breathing?
So indicate it in the gray part on here?
No.
Do you have your hotel receipt?
I said to my daughter, but I
Jason's
have Dr.
Creek?
Moody's hotel receipt for her.
ESPN?
Put a note on both of them.
And that's where I live.
Because, yeah, it'll be different form. I mean, I have to do it locally.
Okay, yeah, I tried to save some taxpayer money, I just.
I was just like,
You've done that before.
Yeah.
Write down your daughter's address so that I could do mileage from
Yeah,
your
I'm sure
home,
I
from your house to here, to that home.
right.
I'll write it down here in all my long notes.
Yeah, nothing.
Sorry.
I used to build trout streams
I see.
in
Okay.
Wisconsin.
Yeah.
When I was in high school. I was driving school.
I'm a teacher and an academic.
One of the programs they had, the Civil Conservation Corps kind of morphed into,
I've got it on this, but I just need to
Pulled in many
if
directions.
you're familiar with the program, but this is back in the day when summer jobs were the thing to have. It was a social thing.
Can you read it?
Summer things,
You gotta go get 2 more sub-forms and then you're done.
public parks
I'll
and,
collect the rest of the
you know,
forms
like
when I come back.
big time parks and trails.
Summer for you today. Play outside.
Playing trout streams, I absolutely loved it. And of course, you learn the ecology of it all, and you learn, you know, why not, you know, little short
Play part. Yeah, that's not, I mean, you really need
Fun
like a
memories.
school that people who can.
Oh, check it out.
It's hard to get the right group.
Same thing,
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and move forward.
and fishing.
I need to come back up here to talk to you about the invitation. I've kind of mentioned some things going along about the invitation, but I wanted to kind of go through it with you, similar to going through the operations manual, so you understand what's in there and what would be really good to go back if you had to focus your attention a little bit later on or when you have time, what you would need to go to specifically. So. Also, I mentioned earlier when Mr. Snyder was up here that I posted 3 documents that he wanted you to look at, and he also has a PowerPoint, so as soon as I can get that in, I'll put that in. That has the links that he was showing up on the screen, so you'll be able to access those too, okay? All right, so let's take a look at the invitation. This is our official document that is the request for bids, I guess you could say. It's our document that goes out to publishers to indicate to them that North Carolina is having a textbook adoption. It indicates to them the content area, and also it presents the tentative schedule of the schedule of events of things that will happen in terms of what they have to do. So it has bid proposal details, it has guidelines for publishers, It has cost proposal spreadsheet examples, which they receive later on, and then it has those content criteria sheets. Hopefully you have been able to kind of look at the document, even if you haven't been able to take a deep read on it. You've been able to look at it so that you can kind of see the structure of it and how it works and the information that it has. So we're going to go through it rather quickly. If we get through all the front matter, you'll see that it has an introduction and requirements. This is where everybody who reads the document can get a general idea of what the invitation is and its purposes. It also highlights some general statutes, so there's some law information in there, what's required, but then it also gives the specific submission parameters. What you all will be doing when you check publishers in, these submission parameters will be important and key as far as what you're looking for and what you're looking at for the check-in. And you'll get more about that as we get closer to evaluation time. Thank you. Okay. So this year on page 2, it's showing that we're considering materials for K-12 English language arts. So this will be all grade levels. Last cycle, we did only K-8 math. And remember, the agency is trying to go back to having an adoption cycle when the standards are revised. So the last time we had the K-8 standards ready, but I think they were still doing some things with the high school standards. This time we have the full K-12 set of standards prepared and ready, and so we'll be looking for materials. That's what our call will go out for, is for those materials. There's a one-pager on textbook evaluation advisors on page 3, but you'll get more information about that when I share with you the packet that I give to advisors. Thumbing through, you can see we list the different areas. So this is where the specific grades on page 4, the specific grades and courses are listed for English language arts. So if you're wondering what those will be, you can see those on the page. On page 5, this is where our tentative schedule is. Commissioner Linker has already outlined meeting dates for you all. There's still some dates. This is tentative, and remember, this is getting ready to go to the board, so this is still draft. So some of these dates may change. I don't foresee like your meeting dates or anything like that changing, but there may be some others that we may have to work around due to meeting space and things like that. But for what you're seeing right now, this is what we've ironed out. In terms of meeting dates for, we have a publishers meeting on here, and you all are more than welcome to come to that meeting. I'm toggling between the 14th and the 15th of March. On here it's saying the 15th, but it may have to be the 14th depending on the space that I can get. So at any rate, if you would like to come to that, you're welcome. It'll also be a virtual option for the publishers meeting, so you could also join virtually if you want to do that. But this is where information is provided to publishers about the fact that we're having an adoption cycle, what it is about, and then going through some of the guidelines with them. The bid proposals are going to be coming in, but prior to that, publishers will be able to submit questions. So you'll be able to see the timeline of everything that's happening behind the scenes. You typically only really have to worry about coming to the meetings, making sure you understand what the criteria will be, understanding the platform, and then selecting advisors. So all of this other work is kind of going on behind the scenes where we're providing the information to the publishers. They're sending things back to DPI. We're getting documents ready for you to have to see what the materials are that you're going to be reviewing, what their bid numbers are. So you'll get all of that. All that will be put together by the time it comes to you, and all you'll know is that you have this one comprehensive document that has all the bid information for you on evaluation week. So all these things that you see on the schedule that aren't commissioner meetings, they are specific to either publishers or just things we have to do internally at DPI. Seal bids submitted, seal bids open, tentatively April the 9th is what we're looking at on this particular schedule. And then a couple more meetings for you all, one in March and one in April. And then we're also looking at the sample sites going out to you all in June 3 through 7. And hopefully that'll give you all enough time from that particular week or by the end of the 7th, that particular day, all the way through time for evaluation, which will be early July. So at that point, hopefully you've had time to get to some of those materials and look through them and do your own, form some of your own thoughts and opinions about them. And then you'll come work with the evaluation advisors on the week of July, the week that we have in July, the 9th through the 13th. And then you'll come back together on August 1 and 2. if we need both days. If not, if we only need one day, we'll take the first. If we need both, we'll go through the second. When you come that day, the last day of your deliberations, your report will be due. Really, we want to say by the time, before you get ready to leave. Before you leave the building, we'd like for you to push whatever button it is that you have to push in the platform to say, I'm submitting my report. So keep that in mind as you're receiving materials and resources, that you want to kind of schedule your time so that you have enough time to be finished, because you won't have any time after the deliberations meeting to go back and to try to review. It'll all have to be done prior to that. Does that make sense? And Commissioner Linker, did you want to speak any to that?
I
or?
think that covers it.
It's good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So on July 8th, Commissioner Linker has already outlined that this is the day when you would come and help with the publishers setting up their displays. We will be at the Embassy Suites Greensboro. That's the airport location. And what will happen is we'll work from 9 to 12 helping publishers in terms of checking in and making sure they'll come and they'll be setting up, and then you'll be checking them in to make sure that they have set up as they're supposed to by our guidelines. And that'll end at 12. And then later on, we will have evaluation training for commissioners and advisors. More so for the advisors, because you all will be receiving your training at your next meeting. But we will be providing something very similar to them. They'll get content area training, they'll get platform training, and they will also get ethics trainings as well. So they'll get everything that you're getting, but that'll be the latter afternoon of July the 8th. So if you can make it at all in terms of being able to come and help check the publishers in, that would definitely be a great help, especially once we find out how many we're going to have to check in. That's the key thing. So when that comes, after those sealed bids are open, then we'll know more about if we need everyone, or if you have something else, that'll be fine. But just try to make it if you can. All right, and then they'll be removing materials tentatively July 13th. That's the last scheduled day. That's a Saturday. So mark your calendars if you want to come, so that you have all the full range of dates available. If not, if there are dates that you can come, I think it's probably best that you come the dates that you can rather than not coming at all, because that is the time where you're going to get some information from the teachers that'll be helpful to you when you're going back trying to finalize your report. You'll see what they recommend, what their comments are. You'll be able to see what they said about standards alignment, and so on and so forth. So it'll be very beneficial if you can come, especially for the debriefing. All right? And so the rest of that is some DPI stuff, the recommended list going out, recommendations to the state board will be early September. And then, of course, things start to come in as far as contracts, bonds, and things like that. Just going through the rest of this, like pages 8, beginning on page 8, that is just bid proposal information. So if you're interested in knowing what the publishers have to submit to us for their bid, you'll find all of those details on those pages. The samples are discussed on beginning on page 11. You all receive a set of samples, and then our textbook warehouse also receives a set of samples. So we do have samples for you prior to evaluation week. This is where it just tells how those are to be sent to you. If it's digital materials, which we know we're receiving more and more digital, if it's digital materials, then information about what needs to be sent for digital materials is also listed here. So either way, you'll be getting information about the resources that would help you be able to access them. So that goes through pages 13 and 14. I would definitely recommend that you look at page 15, which is about the evaluation, deliberation, and reconsideration periods. This gives you information about what has to happen in terms of the setup. So this would be helpful to you. It talks about how publishers have to set up at the evaluation site. So it talks about how much in terms of materials, the correlations, the number of computers. They have to provide the computers for digital resources. And so that it talks about all of that. So this would be helpful to you, I believe, Commissioner Linker, correct me if I'm wrong, if you go through this to see what's required of them, and then that'll help for check-in purposes. The publishers submit the correlations to us. We don't have a specific form for them, but the correlation is where they show us where their materials align to our state standards, and they're supposed to provide that for all of their bid submissions. So that would come along with the samples that you're receiving, as well as being on the site for evaluation. So teachers will be able to see that document. You'll be able to see that document. So it's one way of getting a look at what's supposed to be aligned. Nothing else on that. Again, you can read through that. That's just all the requirements for those meetings. And then also there's some information about the contract requirements and all of that. I think Commissioner Linker alluded to earlier, our schools, our universities, our public universities that have teacher education programs, they do receive materials at the end of the adoption. When those materials that are adopted, when that's decided by our state board, they're supposed to receive a free teacher's edition of each title that was adopted. And they use that with their teacher education program. So many of them are so thankful and happy to receive those, but that is a part of our process. The sampling, which is the blackout information on pages 20 and 21. The first page talks about sampling promotion of textbook programs. I mentioned this to you all earlier. And for this, you'll see in that very first paragraph, it'll tell you the time frame for that. It lets you know from the time the state board issues the invitation, that's on line 3, from the time the state board approves and issues the invitation at its state board meeting until the day after the commissioner's evaluation sessions with textbook advisors. So from the day that the board approves all the way through the day after our evaluation sessions, which would be the 14th, publishers are not allowed to sample or promote those things under consideration for bid. 21 is the one that talks about the restriction for you all not being able to meet with publishers privately. And it also gives you, as number 2, it tells you that from the time the board approves the call letter until the state board adopts the recommended list. So that would be the time frame when you can't have private conversations with publishers. All right, then some more details and understanding for publishers on 22. The content materials start on page 23. So you can see on page 23, this is the standards overview for English Language Arts, or ELA. There's a couple of pages of that. And then you will find the criteria sheets. They have them grouped as K5 and then as 612. So you'll see 2 criteria sheets. We don't use the paper copy of the criteria sheets, but we do put them in the invitation so that publishers, the public, you all, everybody can see these up front. But this same information is put in the platform. So you all are really checking off and putting comments in the platform, but it's the same format as you see here. It's the same items that you see here. So this will give you time to start looking at this and see what you're going to be evaluating against. So you have that all the way through. I told you there's a 612 on page, beginning on page 29. And then that'll go all the way through. There's the EC evaluation, or exceptional children's evaluation, on page 33. And this is very similar. There were some minor changes from last time, but they were just very minor. So this is very similar to what was used last time. We have EC, or exceptional children's teachers, to come in, and they take on the responsibility for reviewing these resources measured against this rubric, as well as their own experiences in the classroom and working with exceptional children. So that'll be very valuable. They'll do their evaluations, and so will the EL advisors, or the EL teachers, or that's the English language learners teachers. They will do the same thing, but with the sheet on page 34. And when they utilize this information, you all do have the opportunity to debrief with them. They don't necessarily make the final recommendations as advisors, but they do have input in terms of the debriefing and providing comments and giving discussion relative to what they saw in terms of the materials. So you all will use that heavily in your thinking about the resources as well. The back matter, getting to the attachments, these are things that are relative to the publisher. So it's a copy of our standard textbook contract, our surety bond, things like that, affidavit, who can submit bids, a sample of the cost proposal sheet, as well as a few other documents, and then the information like who they need to send things to. The main concern for you all, the whole thing, but definitely looking at the content piece that has the criteria sheets, the standards overview, and letting me know if you do have any questions or comments or concerns about the invitation. I know it's a quick turnaround, but we're having to turn things in tomorrow for our state board materials. So if you see anything that you need to bring to my attention, let me know if you can. And you can send me an email if you don't see anything today. If you see anything tomorrow, send me an email like in the morning, because I think I have to turn it in by noon or something like that. So if you could, please, if you have any comments about it, I'll be glad to accept those. You've already had the opportunity, those of you who were at the December meeting, you had the opportunity to comment on the criteria sheets. Those were already made available to you. And it seemed like to me, all the comments that I got, people thought it looked good, those looked good the way that they were. So we didn't have any additional feedback on that. But if you see anything even there, just let me know. I'm finalizing this. We'll get this ready for the board, so the materials have to go in way early so that they can have the opportunity to look over and review. And then once everything goes through and we get our information approved, I will let you all know, and things will be going out on the publisher's registry as well. So you may start to get some people in your districts who are trying to talk to you about it. I have had some calls and some emails and things for people asking what is the content area, but that has been on the web page. I would definitely recommend, if you're not familiar with the textbook adoption web page, that you do go to the DPI website and go to that page. And like I said, I can share that link with you all. But you can go in and you can see last year's information, our meetings, agenda, our meeting audios of our meetings, the agenda, and our PowerPoints are made available on the website. As Mr. Snyder said earlier, it's a public meeting, and so those materials are made available to the public. So all of that stuff still exists there right now. So everything from the 2018 cycle is still there, and then when we move over to this new cycle for 2019, those things will be pulled off and the new stuff will be placed there. But you can get a good idea of what things look like. Even the questions that we had from publishers, those are still there on the publisher's page, as well as other information for them, as well as updates that we put on our front sheet when we had to change the time and all of that. So did anybody have any questions or comments for me? Anybody? I apologize for having to take you through it, but I think it's important enough just to know what's in here, because this is the document that guides what's coming into you and what you have to do once it gets here. So but if you do have any questions, please reach out. I'll be more than happy to talk to you. Remember pages 20 and 21. I think it's always 20 and 21. It seems like it has been for the past few years. But that's the information about the blackout. If you get to the point where they're asking you in your district, that's the time when there should not be, as I said, sampling and promotion of materials that are sent in for bid. Okay? All right. The only other thing is that you need to be aware that I will be sending you an email about sample sites. Commissioner Linker mentioned it to you earlier that you'll be responsible for determining where you want the samples to come. And what we need to do is have a compiled list of all 23 of you so that when I send out to the publishers, they have everybody's information at the same time. Keep in mind that whatever site you select, if it's like a home or somewhere like that, someone would have to be available to receive these packages. You would need to make sure that it's a place where your packages are going to be able to be received or left or something along those lines. So just keep that in mind. I'll send an email out, and more than likely it will be a Google form for you to put your information in, and then I will compile that, and then that will be shared with you all also. So I'll keep our folders up to date with information, and if there's something that I need to put in a folder that's for the good of the group, please feel free to let me know, and I'll do that. And we'll try to make sure that everybody is okay and successful in getting into the folders that I share. I know we've had a few people that have had a few hiccups, but just let me know and just work with me, and we'll try to make sure that you have access and that you can get in. Sometimes, like I think a few people sent me a message in the evening yesterday, and I didn't get a chance to get back in, but I saw it this morning and was able to share with you. So I try to make the sharing as friendly as possible, but I think with it being an agency account, sometimes when you're external, there's just some kind of a hiccup. But we'll work through it. Just make sure you let me know if you're having any issues or if you have a Google address that you want me to use or whatever the case may be. Okay? Anything else? We're good? All right. Commissioner Linker?
Before we close and talk about next steps, I just thought of another hint for sample stuff, as well as somebody being there during the business hours, because it does come in on a semi truck usually. It's not necessarily going to be. It's not necessarily going to be a UPS or
Thank you for
FedEx. Because it comes from the one publisher. So like Mickey Mouse Publisher can send everything in one shipment, which might be a pallet versus a UPS truck. Depending on the person, they might not take it but to that point. So like if you were to get a storage unit, they're going to deliver it at the gate, and it's going to be up to you to get it to your unit, kind of thing. Or if you put a school address, they're going to take it to the office. That happened to me. I just happened to have some wonderful custodians the first year who I took to lunch because they took it to the place to just know that whomever they contract to deliver the goods, it's whatever their rules are, which is generally, they deliver it to that point, and then it's up to you to get it from that point to your room or your situation or whatever. So just to keep in mind when you're final logistics, like I say, some places work really well because they love the fact that you're giving them materials. And so, okay. Next steps, we've kind of covered everything as far as like next steps. So before now in the meeting, next time, if you want to look at anything, the bid should be, the invitation document should be approved before we meet next time. So after that date is when you can start reaching out to the your potential advisors and kind of filling some, getting some connections that way. And I think that is all that I have. We did everything. Anybody have any questions?
Ma'am, just a point of clarification. The educational documents or textbooks that we are looking at this year are all K through 12 ELA. So when you talk about the 126 advisors collectively from the committee,
they will all be teachers or experts in that field. So for instance, you wouldn't
get a science teacher.
Yeah, unless it's an elementary, because a lot of elementary teachers teach everything. But some schools do departmentalize. So you might have a 5th grade teacher who just does math. And in that case, you probably wouldn't want that person.
Understood, ma'am.
But yeah, but in middle school and high school, they are specific to, they either call themselves language arts or they're in the ELA, English Language Arts department. You may have coaches, reading coaches that are interested, but it's okay to be a reading coach and be in the potential list, but we really want the majority to be in the field classroom teachers, because those are the ones that are working with the materials and are really up to date on the standards and the needs of their students.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So
I would just say before you adjourn, I just want to remind everybody, if you did not sign in, please make sure you sign in at the table in the front of the room by the screen. And also be sure to leave your name plates and your name badges back there on that table as well. Okay?
So to close, as we follow Robert's rules, we need a motion to close the meeting and a second.
I second.
So I have Commissioner Cheshire making the motion to adjourn and Commissioner Wood seconding. All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Opposed? Unanimous in favor? Safe trips home.
Okay.
I can get that.
I have to be at a meeting. Yeah. And we'll meet you too. So your information is on the email, correct?
See,